This is going to be the final lecture on the Universal Embodiment, and we're going to title this one, Awakening a Universe. Let's imagine that we were told from the earliest age that we can conceive such things, that causality rules, and that we are the highest capacity and capability that the universe has to experience itself. Imagine growing up with the deepest of introspective states, having practiced mindfulness meditation, and having been gently taught to deal with the concept of self and other, and how we're all so very connected. Imagine being taught to properly absorb philosophy and steam hams from as early of an age as possible. Steam hams, by the way, is a great alternative to STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, humanities, anthropology, and music and such. These are the things that we need to be bringing into the modern day education system that people are talking about, so much so that it's already made this alternative acronym to STEM. Anyways, imagine being taught all these things from an early of an age as possible in a language that we can understand. This will allow for a much more adept adult to develop, an individual that will achieve wisdom in an early age and make wise decisions as a child. But this is not usually how it works. Most often we come to awareness and mindfulness gradually, if at all. We come to accept physical realities, restrictions, and revelations, or we get hit in the face by a massive psychedelic experience or some powerful lecture that just gets right to the point. Now, imagining what it would be like to have lived a life like this, having been raised this way, is a useful perspective. Even though we didn't live like that, this is the state that we're trying to achieve. And taking on this perspective, in my opinion, we will be put into a bit of a Plato's cave situation. We've been exposed to reality, we've left the cave of false paradigms and distractions, we've removed our monkey blinders and can now see the sun and reality for how it is. And we're excited to share this new truth of the world with everyone. But of course, when we return to the cave, no one believes us. Some may listen and even be intrigued and tell us they like our ideas, but they are still residing in the cave, and their primary source of interpreting their reality is still the fire and the light and the shadows on the wall in front of them. What we're talking about confronting here is what L.A. Paul calls the transformative experience. And it is always difficult and always requires effort. Specifically, the transformative experience is when we take a leap of faith into another form of being. We go boldly into the unknown, because we don't know what life will be like after we take this big plunge. This is one reason why people are so afraid to try new things, and to commit to new beliefs or practices. It is psychologically and phenomenologically daunting, and there's plenty of neurobiological evidence to explaining the resistance to change as well. Combinatorial explosion, the distribution of resource management in the brain and body, and good old neuroplasticity versus the default mode network. But we have to remember that this is the world that most people inhabit. Most people are still in the cave in one form or another, and most people, mostly unconsciously, turn a blind eye to the parts of reality that don't line up with their narrowly constructed and compartmentalized worldview, because this is how natural selection set them up to be. When we tell them these different ways of looking at things, they may even reactively laugh at us or mock us. And from this knowledge about the way things work, we can hold empathy. When we see that reaction, we can also hold instant empathy. We can think about this in many different ways. Universal embodiment as viewed by the Polymath. Okay, here's another great one from Sadhguru. He says that, quote, "Belief means I have concretized assumptions of that which I know nothing about." This is a great quote, and it describes a lot of issues that we have with ignorance and with the lacking of knowing the philosophical razors and critical thinking. I would possibly replace the word nothing with little, and that can get us even farther. As much as we know about science, even with all its grand knowledge, it still knows little about certain things. That's why the explanations we arrive at via the scientific method are responsibly always left as open-ended theories, not conclusions. He continues, "Only when your attention and involvement is indiscriminate does the universe open up to you." He also describes pain as a, quote, self-preservation mechanism. He says suffering is something you do in your mind. Humans are unique in that we have the capacity to ruminate. We can suffer from things that happened 10 years ago. There's another good quote from Brett Weinstein, actually. "By and large, the direct perception of objects around you, because your system is built in a way that makes it intuitive, doesn't require critical thinking or scientific understanding." And another one, just for a little encouragement, from Tom Bellew, progress comes from a hunger to know where you are wrong. When we're looking for the holes in our logic and the way that we're proceeding in reality, we don't want to shrink away from problems when we end up making mistakes. It can help to feel embarrassment. That's why that emotion is there. We want to examine it and learn from it. Embodying the all-encompassing objective perspectives of a universe awakening to itself and realizing its capacities and those of others can only lead us to better empathizing and sympathizing with others, because we are instantly put into a position of relation. Especially using the salience landscape and Umwelt expansion exercises like retrospective gratitude and this third-person mode viewing perspective that we've been describing, one is left knowing that we are far more similar than we are different. We are all made of the same star stuff emergent from the same macroverse, and host the same mutual reciprocity between the organic life in our microverses. And keeping this ultimate reality as our guiding light makes the concept of seeking to relate to each other seem quite obvious. and it can become a base reactionary state, a default mode. At least this has been the case for me. Deterministic empathy is what I would say is the primary result of practicing this universal embodiment framework. How can you not feel infinite empathy towards all others when you realize just how complex and causal reality really is? How can one not feel infinite mercy and forgiveness when realizing just how easily self-deceived and lost in the fog people tend to become? When we talk about any different way of looking at the world, and people mock us, this mocking is from a place of ego defense. The individual has solidified a worldview that brings them much comfort, and to have that questioned is threatening to them. This causes great distress. So for this particular individual, their base reaction is mockery or laughter. This is a base reactionary thing. It's not really clearly not their best self that's being represented. So why would we view them as presenting their best self in that instance? Well, we could be viewing this as that people are struggling to represent their best self at all times, which is kind of what it seems like. If you look at how people say things like, I just try to be good, or I'm just doing my best in this world, like people are really struggling to exemplify empathy and things like that. It's tricky though. If the mocking individual has had prior training in how to respond properly to different perspectives like this, then perhaps they would have paused and thought of a more appropriate response than to do this base reactionary ego-defensing laughter thing. Again, this is why we say think before you speak. We have all these ancient tropes because there are things that we need to be reminded of. They simply don't come naturally to us. Often we even interrupt each other in order to share our ideas because we're so excited to share with each other, even though it sometimes might come off as rude. We want to relate to each other, but we simply don't know what we're doing. We don't know any better. We're not as aware as we could be of the method that we're using to express this type of relation. This individual is likely brought great comfort by their belief system, and we've interjected on that. We've shook that up with new information. And people's reaction to their worldview being shaken is always going to be different. Sometimes you get lucky and people are patient and understanding, but most of the time, people's egos take over wherever that's stored in the brain, like the many parts of our individual self and our feelings of safety and security in the world, that all of that hinges upon our worldview or on our compartmentalized belief system. And when someone tells us that that's wrong or shows us evidence that that's wrong, clearly there's going to be some reactions there. And I should be more specific. Clearly there will be neurochemical and neurobiological and electrical reactions going on that will defend and that will send up messages to the rest of the brain so fast and so strongly that the prefrontal cortex that has been trained to properly react to things may not react as well as it could, and thus the person laughs or like mocks us or says, "Ha, you think that?" or whatever like that. I mean, that's clearly what's going on, unless we want to think that the person is actually being mean and is just a jerk and likes to mock people on purpose, and they get some kind of thrill out of being lost in the world and not like just denying everything that they see, like, no, that's wrong, I will have no assurance in life. Now, clearly people are trying to find assurance, and they're taking whatever they can get, and they're connecting the dots however it works for them, because we can't examine every single aspect of reality. We can't expect people to have examined every aspect of reality, certainly not in as much of a depth as we are currently here. Anyways, we are not given an instruction manual for this complicated life. We know that people are very highly subjected to neurochemically established default methods of balancing a sane existence. And when the majority of the necessary components to keep them sane and happy are all there, any external explanation to the contrary will immediately seem offensive and be rejected. But I want to emphasize this word majority here. It's easy to keep a monkey happy. It's easy to keep our blinders on our eyes and remain in rudimentary belief systems that fill in the gaps in logic with feelings, metaphors, powerful stories, like those we find in religion or tarot or any of the mystical practices, because this is the mind and body that natural selection selected for. Why would it select for traits that made things any more complicated than necessary in order to keep the monkey safe, sane, and fed? We're looking for stability. This neurostasis and homeostasis is what we are biologically set up to pursue, and we're lucky to have that. We're lucky to be able to afford such stability. It could be like some evolutionary theorists like to theorize, it could be that we've been extremely stressed out in our past. Some even theorize that we've had two minds that were arguing or confronting with each other for 100,000 years or so because of the corpus callosum being so small. It could be that there was no corpus callosum, or it was much less connected than the little bit of connection that it already has right now. And so there could have been like two voices in our head the whole time, because that's what we see with split brain patients. So it's good that we have so many methods at this point, and like over the last 3,000 years or so, we've been developing so many ways of integrating with the human body and examining the human condition. But again, this is another Another perspective that we aren't necessarily set up to be able to comprehend completely, because we live in these year-long planning periods, or like a lot of times we don't even plan for like the next week. And to be able to conceive of these long stretches of time, well, it's good that we have the capacity to be able to do that too, like to be able to expand on that ability. It could be that we had a much narrower imaginative and imaginal abilities, but fortunately we can expand on our imaginative abilities. Now, this biologically necessary seeking of stability, this can cause us to take the path of least resistance, specifically when it comes to the unfathomable, or rather what's difficult to fathom. So we nod in agreement when the preacher says that one powerful statement with such vigor and passion, and when that statement is followed up from a quote from an ancient text, suddenly the dots are connected and a resolution is had. We experience an aha moment, all without bringing in any logic or critical thinking or facts into the matter. This is reacting from feelings-based or faith-based mindset. Of course, a similar thing happens within science as well. We side with one person that we unconsciously idolize because they speak well and use references quickly, and when pushed on an issue, we label ourselves a Spinozist or a Cartesian dualist or a physicist. Though the difference being that the proper scientist remains objective and unbiased to further the self-cleaning house of science at large. And good scientists try to incorporate multiple fields into their perspectives and seek criticism in search of facts and reason, even if it compromises their project they've worked on for 10 years or a lifetime. These compartmentalizations are all neurobiological tendencies that natural selection selected for, and the amalgamation of our conscious life. Natural selection is the mechanism, but this developed human condition is what gives way to choice and perspective. Natural selection has also rendered an organism that doesn't just view reality, but can decide how it views reality. So let us act upon this newfound emergent power and view our world in the best light possible. And where it falls short of that vision, let us try to seek with our best of our ability to improve it. Let us consistently be finding better ways to integrate with the world, and not hide from it. If life is so deterministic, then let us strive to set forth positive causal networks with the kind of free will that we do have within ourselves and within the world. And with the mindset of an all-encompassing creature residing in its middle cosmos, and a captain of a ship of Theseus that continuously rebuilds itself, a complex microcosm with trillions of moving parts working in cohesion, and a complex macrocosm that explodes stars to make planets with limited resources. So let us act responsibly to properly manage the resources within this microcosm that we host within ourselves, and act responsibly to properly manage the resources on the planet that hosts us as well. Well, that's it for this Universal Embodiment lecture series. We've explored deep into the scientific and deterministic. Next week we'll be delving into some of the lessons that we can learn from the religious and metaphysical communities. Remember, we're trying to look at the well-lived life from as many perspectives as possible here. Much of the ancient theologies consist of parables and life lessons written down by people, and many of them did consider themselves prophets or divinely inspired, but many of the messages that they put forth still have great merit today. Like the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Anyways, we'll be looking at this next week through various lenses, keeping critical thinking, logic, and modern-day therapies as a prioritized throughout the series. I honestly feel like this is a very healthy and productive way to go through life, is trying to find the valuable parts in all of practices that people engage in, using logic and critical thinking and the philosophical razors and the logical fallacies and the razors that cut through them to determine what is the most valuable parts of these practices and what is not valuable. Thank God that we have these razors. Like, thank God we have, 2,000 years of people thinking about the right ways of thinking, like how to properly watch out for the wrong ways of thinking, or like the thought loops and the traps that we get caught into. And we'll go through these physical razors as well in part of the next lesson and the lesson after that. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to donate anything, if you feel this video is worthy, here's a Patreon. And please feel free to subscribe and comment and share this video to get more attention with this video series out there so people can see it. Clearly, as you see by the subscriber count, there aren't many people watching this. So any of you that would feel gracious enough to share this with the world on any platform, it's highly appreciated.